Captain Jake Morrison walked into the massive council chamber with steady steps. The room was huge, made of crystal that sparkled under the bright lights. Hundreds of alien delegates sat in curved rows, their strange forms creating shadows on the walls. Some had multiple eyes, others had scales or fur, and a few looked like they were made of living metal. Jake had been Earth's representative to the Galactic Council for 5 years. He knew every face in this room, every species and their habits. Today felt different, though. The air was thick with tension, and the usual friendly chatter between delegates was missing. Admiral Lisa Carter stood behind him, her uniform crisp and her face calm. She had arrived from Earth just yesterday with orders that Jake still found hard to believe. Next to her was Commander Rick Barnes, a young officer who had never seen anything like this before. Dr. Helen Wright sat nearby, her medical bag close at hand as always. Ambassador Paul Stevens completed their small group. The chamber grew quiet as Council Prime Vexter rose from his central seat. He was a Zephyrian, tall and thin, with 4 bright blue eyes and skin that looked like polished stone. When he spoke, his voice came through translators that made it sound mechanical and cold. "The Galactic Council has reached a decision regarding humanity," Vexter announced. His 4 eyes focused on Jake with what might have been satisfaction. Jake said nothing. He had learned long ago that silence was often the best response in these situations. "For 200 years, humans have been members of this council," Vexter continued. "You have been given the same rights and freedoms as all other species. You have been allowed to expand, to explore, to build colonies across the galaxy." "Eh?" Murmur ran through the chamber. Jake noticed that most of the delegates were avoiding eye contact with him. "However," Vexter's voice grew harder, "humanity has repeatedly violated the Treaty of Celestial Boundaries. You have expanded into restricted zones. You have built military installations where none were permitted. You have ignored warnings and continued your aggressive expansion." The Draknari war chief Grolthak stood up suddenly. He was massive, covered in thick scales and armed with ceremonial weapons. "These humans think they own the galaxy," he roared. "They build where they want, take what they want, and ignore our laws." More voices joined in. The Serpentine Nailer delegate hissed her agreement. "They have no respect for ancient territories. They claim empty systems as if they were the first to discover them." Jake remained silent, but his mind was racing. These accusations were not new. Humanity had been having the same arguments with the Council for decades. The difference was that today nobody was speaking in their defense. "The Council has voted," Vexter announced. "By a margin of 412 to 37, with 16 abstentions, we have decided that humanity poses a threat to galactic peace and stability." Admiral Carter's jaw tightened slightly, but she kept her expression neutral. Commander Barnes shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Dr. Wright closed her eyes for a moment, as if praying. "Therefore," Vexter continued, "humanity will comply with the following terms immediately. All human military vessels will be surrendered to Council control. All human colonies outside the Sol system will be evacuated within 1 standard year. All human military installations will be dismantled. Earth and its immediate solar system will be placed under permanent Council oversight." The chamber erupted in alien sounds that the translators couldn't quite handle. Some delegates were cheering, others were making noises of approval, and a few seemed uncomfortable with the harsh terms. Jake finally spoke, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber. "These are not terms for discussion. These are terms for surrender." "Exactly," Grolthak growled with obvious pleasure. "Your species has proven it cannot be trusted with freedom. You will be contained." "The decision is final," Vexter stated. "The Council expects full compliance within 72 hours. Dr. Wright leaned forward in her seat. "What about our research partnerships, our medical programs? We have ongoing projects that affect the health of billions of beings across the galaxy." The Altarian delegate, a thin creature with large eyes, spoke up. "Such programs will be transferred to Council oversight. We appreciate human contributions, but they are not irreplaceable." Admiral Carter stood up slowly. And if we refuse these terms, then the Council will enforce them, Vexter replied coldly. Our combined fleets are more than sufficient to contain one stubborn species. Jake looked around the chamber one more time. These aliens had been his colleagues for years. He had negotiated treaties with them, shared meals with them, and worked to solve galactic problems together. Now they were treating humanity like criminals. We need time to consider your offer, Jake said carefully. It is not an offer, the Naylor delegate hissed. It is a command. Nevertheless, Jake continued, we need time to prepare our response. 72 hours, as you suggested, Vexter nodded. Very well, the Council will reconvene in exactly 72 hours to receive humanity's formal acceptance of these terms. As the session ended, Jake and his team filed out of the chamber. The alien delegates were already celebrating, discussing how to divide up human territories and resources. Nobody paid attention to the small group of humans leaving quietly in the corridor outside. Ambassador Stevens finally spoke. They really think they can just order us around like children. They've been planning this for months, Admiral Carter said quietly. Maybe years. This wasn't a sudden decision. Commander Barnes looked confused. But we've been allies with most of these species for generations. We've helped them, fought alongside them, shared our technology with them. Dr. Wright shook her head sadly. That's exactly why they're afraid of us. We've become too useful, too important. They want our contributions without giving us the freedom to make our own choices. Jake said nothing until they reached their private quarters. Once the door was sealed and the security systems activated, he turned to Admiral Carter. Are the preparations complete? Carter nodded. Operation Silent Departure has been active for 72 hours. Every human installation, every colony, every ship has received their orders. And the timeline? 48 hours for complete. Withdrawal. Everything will be gone before the Council expects our answer. Jake smiled for the first time that day. Good, let's see how well they manage without us. The next morning, across the galaxy, humanity began to move. But the Council, still celebrating their victory, had no idea what was coming. They were about to learn that there was a difference between controlling humans and actually having their cooperation. The quiet revolution had already begun. Admiral Lisa Carter stood in the communication center of the human embassy, watching screens that showed the entire galaxy. Each screen displayed a different human colony, military base, or research station. The message she was about to send would change everything. She pressed the transmission button and spoke clearly into the microphone. This is Admiral Carter with Priority Alpha orders. Operation Silent Departure is now active. All human personnel and assets are to return to Sol System immediately. No exceptions, no delays. Pack everything and come home. The message went out instantly through quantum communication networks that humans had built across the galaxy. Within minutes, responses began coming back from every corner of known space. Captain Steve Rogers was exploring a distant star system when the message reached his ship. He had been mapping planets for the past 6 months, looking for new worlds that might support human colonies. His crew was excited about their discoveries, but Steve didn't hesitate when he heard the Admiral's voice. Navigation, set course for Earth, he ordered. Maximum speed. His first officer looked confused. Captain, we're in the middle of important surveys. The Council is expecting our reports. The Council can wait, Steve replied. We're going home. Similar conversations were happening on hundreds of ships throughout the galaxy. Trade vessels stopped their deliveries. Exploration ships abandoned their missions. Military patrols left their positions and began the long journey back to human space. On the industrial world of Kepler 442b, Governor Nancy Walsh received the message while inspecting the massive shipyards that surrounded the planet. These shipyards had been built by humans 50 years ago and now produced vessels for half the galaxy. The Altarians, Hegemony, and even some Drachnary factions bought their ships here. Governor, what are your orders? Asked Chief Engineer Tony Mitchell. Nancy looked at the massive construction platforms floating in space around them. Each platform was the size of a small city filled with advanced manufacturing equipment that only humans truly understood. Begin dismantling operations. I want every piece of equipment loaded onto cargo ships within 48 hours. Ma'am, that's impossible. We have contracts with a dozen alien governments. They're expecting ship deliveries next month? They'll have to find someone else to build their ships, Nancy replied. Start with the quantum foundries. Those are the most important. Tony still looked worried. The Altarians have a trade delegation. Arriving tomorrow, they want to discuss expanding production. Tell them we're closed for business, Nancy said firmly. Permanently. Across the galaxy, the same scene was playing out at every human facility. In the Vega system, Dr. Kevin Clark was packing up the most advanced medical research station in known space. For 20 years, the station had developed treatments for diseases that affected dozens of alien species. The breakthrough cancer treatments, the neural repair procedures, the genetic therapies, all of it was being carefully loaded onto transport ships. Doctor, the Zephyrian Medical Council is requesting an emergency meeting, reported his assistant. They say there are patients who will die without the treatments we're developing. Kevin paused in his packing. He had dedicated his life to helping others, regardless of their species. But his orders were clear. Tell them to contact the Galactic Council. Maybe they can help? The most critical operation was happening at the Titan Industrial Complex in the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter. General Amy Foster watched as her teams carefully dismantled the most advanced manufacturing facility in the galaxy. The quantum processors, the hyperspace communication arrays, the molecular assemblers, all of it was being moved to secret locations deeper in the Sol system. General, we're receiving urgent messages from the hegemony, reported Lieutenant Colonel Gary Phillips. They're demanding to know why production has stopped. Amy checked her watch. 24 hours had passed since the Admiral's message. What's their tone? Confused at first, now getting angry. They have major military contracts with us. Too bad, Amy replied. They should have thought about that before they decided to put us in a cage. The hegemony wasn't the only government getting worried. The Draknari were discovering that their weapons needed human-made components for maintenance. The Zephyrians were realizing that their communication networks depended on human technology. The Nailer were finding that their trade routes relied on human-built navigation systems on Earth. Jake Morrison sat in a secure conference room with the planet's leadership. President Maria Johnson looked tired as she reviewed reports from across the galaxy. How long until everyone is back? She asked. 48 hours for complete withdrawal, Jake replied. But the effects are already being felt. The galactic economy is starting to shake. Good, said Defense Minister Robert Taylor. Maybe they'll think twice before trying to control us again. Dr. Wright entered the room with a tablet full of data. The medical facilities are reporting chaos. Apparently, most alien doctors can't operate the equipment we designed. They never bothered to learn how it actually works. What about the patients? President Johnson asked. The Altarians are begging us to leave skeleton crews behind. They say thousands will die without our medical support. Jake felt a moment of sadness. He had always believed in helping others, but the council had made their choice. We offered to train their doctors years ago. They said it was too expensive. Meanwhile, across the galaxy, alien governments were starting to panic. The Altarian Prime Minister called an emergency session when their largest hospital reported that critical equipment was shutting down without human technicians. How did we become so dependent on them? He asked his advisors. Because they were good at everything, replied his science minister. Better than us at engineering, medicine, manufacturing. It was easier to hire humans than to develop our own expertise. The hegemony discovered that their newest battleships couldn't function without human-designed power systems. The Draknari found that their weapons factories had stopped working when the human engineers left. The Zephyrians realized that their trade networks were collapsing without human logistics support. In the council chamber, emergency meetings were being called every few hours. Vexter looked increasingly worried as reports came in from across the galaxy. The humans are evacuating everything, reported his aide. Not just military assets, everything, their doctors, engineers, scientists, technicians, they're all leaving. This is economic warfare, declared the Draknari representative. They're trying to force us to change our decision. Maybe we should, suggested the Altarian delegate quietly. Our civilization is already starting to break down. Nonsense, Vexter replied, but his four eyes showed doubt. We survived before humans joined the council. We can survive without them. But deep down, he was beginning to realize that might not be true. The galaxy had changed in the 2 centuries since first contact with humanity. They had become the engineers, the doctors, the problem solvers. Other species had become comfortable letting humans handle the difficult tasks. Now those humans were quietly packing up and going home, taking their expertise with them. And the galaxy was about to discover just how much they had come to depend on the species they had just tried to cage. The quiet revolution was accelerating, and there was no way to stop it. Jake Morrison walked back into the council chamber exactly 72 hours after the ultimatum had been delivered. The massive crystal hall looked the same as before, but the mood was completely different. Where there had been celebration and confidence 3 days ago, now there was nervous tension in the air. The alien delegates were still in their seats, but many were speaking quietly with their aides or checking data tablets. Jake noticed that several species had brought additional representatives, as if they expected important negotiations. Vexter stood at the central podium, his 4 blue eyes focused on the human delegation. Ambassador Morrison, the Council is ready to receive your formal acceptance of our terms. Jake walked calmly to the center of the chamber, carrying a simple data tablet. Admiral Carter, Dr. Wright, Commander Barnes, and Ambassador Stevens followed behind him. Their faces showed no emotion, but Jake could feel the tension radiating from the alien delegates around them. We have prepared our response, Jake said in a clear voice that carried throughout the chamber. Excellent, Vexter replied, leaning forward with satisfaction. Please present your terms of surrender. Jake placed his tablet on the central podium and activated it. A holographic display appeared showing official Earth government seals and legal documents. Humanity formally withdraws from the Galactic Council, effective immediately. The chamber fell silent. Even the usual background humming of the translation devices seemed to stop. We are terminating all trade agreements, research partnerships, defense pacts, and cooperation treaties with all Council member species, Jake continued. All human personnel and assets are returning to Sol System. The silence stretched for several seconds before the Draknari war chief Grolfak began laughing. It was a harsh, barking sound that echoed off the crystal walls. You think this frightens? U.S.? Good riddance to your troublesome species. Other delegates began to murmur agreement. The Naylor representative hissed with what might have been amusement. Let them sulk in their home system. We will manage perfectly well without them. Jake waited for the noise to die down before continuing. We are also discontinuing all technical support contracts, maintenance agreements, and knowledge-sharing programs. The laughter stopped abruptly. Councillor Thizes of the Centauri Republic stood up quickly. What do you mean by technical support? Contracts? All human engineers, technicians, and specialists have been recalled from non-human facilities, Jake replied calmly. As of 6 hours ago, the last human technician departed Centauri space. The Centauri delegate's face went pale. But our shipyards depend on human engineers. We have construction projects that will take years to complete. You'll need to find other engineers, Jake said simply. The Altarian delegate stood up with shaking hands. Our medical facilities require human doctors and researchers. We have patients in the middle of critical treatments. Dr. Wright stepped forward. All human medical teams completed their final rounds yesterday. Patient care has been transferred to local medical staff. But they don't understand the equipment, the Altarian protested. The treatment protocols are too complex for our doctors to follow. Then you'll need to train them, Dr. Wright replied. We offered comprehensive training programs 5 years ago, but your government declined due to cost concerns. Panic was beginning to spread through the chamber. The hegemony representative frantically consulted his data tablet. The Titan Industrial Complex has ceased all operations. Our supply contracts have been terminated. Our manufacturing facilities throughout the galaxy have been shut down, Jake confirmed. All equipment and personnel are being relocated to Sol System? This is impossible, declared the Zephyrian Trade Minister. You cannot simply abandon ongoing projects? We have legal agreements, Admiral Carter stepped forward. Those agreements included clauses for termination due to political circumstances. Restrictions on human sovereignty qualify as political circumstances. The true scope of the situation was becoming clear to the delegates. Without human expertise, major systems throughout the galaxy were already beginning to fail. The Draknari discovered that their newest weapons required human-designed components for operation. The Nailer found that their trade networks depended on human-built navigation systems. Vexter S. Four Eyes darted nervously between his advisors. This is economic warfare. You cannot simply walk away from your responsibilities to galactic civilization. We're not walking away from anything, Jake replied. We're simply respecting your decision to restrict humanity to the Sol System. We're going to stay there, exactly as you demanded. But you're taking everything with you, protested the hegemony delegate. Our colonies need the industrial equipment you're removing. That equipment was built by humans, maintained by humans, and operated by humans, Jake said. It belongs to us, the Altarian delegate was nearly crying. Children are going to die without the cancer treatments your doctors developed. You cannot abandon sick patients. Dr. Wright's expression softened slightly, but her voice remained firm. We offered to share those treatment protocols freely with all Council species 3 years ago. The vote was to classify them as restricted military technology, your choice. We were wrong, the Altarian admitted. We made a mistake, but innocent people will suffer for our decision. Yes, they will, Jake agreed. Just as innocent humans would have suffered under your restrictions. The difference is that we're not forcing you to accept our decision. The chamber erupted in angry voices. Delegates were shouting at each other, demanding explanations from their own governments, and making frantic calls to their homeworlds. The careful order of the Council was breaking down. You're destroying galactic civilization, accused the Nailer delegate. We're not destroying anything, Jake replied. We're simply removing our contributions to it. If that destroys your civilization, maybe you should ask yourself why you were so dependent on a species you wanted to cage. The Draknari war chief stood up threateningly. We have fleets. We can force you to return to work. With what weapons? Admiral Carter asked calmly. Your fleet's targeting systems use human-designed processors. Your shields require human-manufactured power cores. Your communications depend on human-built quantum transmitters. Grolthak checked his data tablet and his expression changed from anger to worry. Our weapon systems are showing critical failures. Maintenance was due last week, Carter informed him. Your technicians don't know how to perform it. The reality was sinking in across the chamber. For 2 centuries, humanity had been the galaxy's problem solvers. Other species had become comfortable letting humans handle the difficult tasks of engineering, medicine, and manufacturing. Now those humans were gone, and the infrastructure of galactic civilization was beginning to collapse. We need to negotiate, Vexter said quietly. There must be a way to resolve this situation. Jake shook his head. You had your chance to negotiate 3 days ago. Instead, you presented us with surrender terms. Now you can live with the consequences. He turned to leave, followed by the other human delegates. Behind them, the council chamber descended into chaos as alien governments realized they were facing the collapse of their technological civilization. The quiet revolution had become a reckoning, and there was no going back. 1 week had passed since humanity announced their withdrawal from the Galactic Council. The galaxy was falling apart faster than anyone had imagined possible. Emergency broadcasts filled the communication networks as governments across known space struggled to maintain basic services. The Zephyrian flagship Eternal Glory drifted helplessly in space after its main reactor suffered a critical failure. Captain Zextel stood on the bridge, watching his engineering teams work frantically to fix systems they barely understood. The reactor had been designed by humans and maintained by human engineers for 30 years. Now those engineers were gone. Status. Report, Zextel demanded. The quantum containment field is unstable, reported his chief engineer. We need to shut down the reactor completely or risk an explosion that could destroy half the fleet. What about the human technical manuals? We have them, but they're written in human scientific notation. Our computers can't translate the mathematical concepts properly. Zextel felt helpless. His mighty warship, pride of the Zephyrian fleet, was now just an expensive piece of floating metal. Similar problems were affecting ships throughout the galaxy as human-designed components failed without proper maintenance. On the Draknari homeworld, War Chief Grolthak stood in his command center watching reports of military disasters. His newest weapon systems, purchased from human manufacturers just months ago, were shutting down one by one. The targeting computers couldn't calibrate properly. The energy shields were failing. Even the communication systems were having problems. How many ships are still operational? He asked his aide. Less than 40%, and that number is dropping every hour, came the grim reply. The older ships with traditional Draknari technology are still working, but they're no match for modern threats. Grolthak slammed his fist on the table. We built the greatest military in the galaxy before humans ever existed. We can do it again. Yes, sir, but it will take decades to rebuild our manufacturing capabilities. The humans integrated their technology so deeply into our systems that we can't simply remove it. The situation was even worse on the Altarian homeworld. In the capital city's main hospital, Dr. Veltar watched helplessly as patients suffered without the advanced treatments that human doctors had developed. The cancer ward was especially heartbreaking. Children who had been making excellent progress were now facing death as their treatment protocols failed. Doctor, the neural reconstruction unit has stopped responding, reported a nurse. We can't figure out how to restart it. Dr. Veltar had worked alongside human doctors for 15 years, but he had never bothered to learn how their equipment actually functioned. He had always assumed that humans would be available to handle the technical details. Try contacting the human medical team, he suggested desperately. We did. They said all support contracts have been terminated. They won't even answer technical questions. In the hegemony core worlds, entire colonies were being abandoned as life support systems failed. The terraforming equipment that had made marginal planets habitable required constant maintenance by human technicians. Without them, atmospheric processors were shutting down and environmental controls were failing. Governor Talvin of the Kepler 438 colony watched from the evacuation ships as his world slowly became uninhabitable again. 3 million colonists were being relocated to older, overcrowded worlds because their home could no longer support life. How long do we have? He asked his science advisor. The atmosphere will become toxic within 6 months, came the reply. The human technicians warned us about this possibility years ago. They said we needed to train our own people to maintain the systems. Why didn't we listen? Because it was cheaper to hire humans than to educate our own citizens. We thought they would always be available. The economic collapse was spreading throughout the galaxy. Trade routes that had operated smoothly for decades were breaking down as human-built navigation systems failed. The Naylor Serpent Roads, the most important trade network in the galaxy, was experiencing massive delays and accidents. Trade Minister Sashara reviewed the disaster reports with growing despair. How many ships have we lost this week? 17. Vessels destroyed, 43 stranded in deep space, and hundreds more experiencing navigation failures, her aide reported. The human-designed quantum compass systems are going offline faster than we can repair them. Can we replace them with our own technology? Our best scientists are working on it, but human navigation technology is decades ahead of anything we've developed. It may take years to create suitable replacements. Meanwhile, in the Sol system, humanity watched the galactic crisis with mixed emotions. Admiral Carter stood in the command center of Luna Station, monitoring communication intercepts. from across the galaxy. The reports were devastating, but she felt no satisfaction in the suffering. The Altarian government has officially requested emergency medical assistance, reported Commander Barnes. They're offering to pay 10 times the normal rates. Declined. Carter replied firmly. No human personnel are authorized to leave the Sol system. Dr. Wright looked up from her research station. The casualty reports are getting worse. The Zephyrian medical system is collapsing. They're reporting thousands of preventable deaths. Carter's expression remained stern. They voted to classify our medical research as military technology. They chose politics over patient care. What about the hegemony colonies? Entire worlds are being evacuated. They knew their terraforming systems required human maintenance. We warned them repeatedly about the consequences of our withdrawal. Jake Morrison entered the command center with the latest intelligence reports. The council has been in emergency session for 3 days straight. They're trying to develop alternatives to human technology. Any progress? Carter asked. None. They're discovering that human innovations are integrated into every aspect of their civilization. They can't simply remove our contributions and expect everything to keep working. The Drachneri have issued threats, Jake continued. They're saying they'll use force to compel our return. Carter smiled grimly. With what? Their weapon systems are failing faster than their ships. Last I heard, Gralthek's flagship was dead in space. The irony was not lost on anyone. The same species that had demanded humanity's disarmament were now discovering that their own weapons depended heavily on human technology. The council that had voted to restrict human military development was finding that their own military capabilities were crumbling without human support. There's something else, Jake said quietly. The Altarian Prime Minister has requested a private meeting. He wants to discuss terms for our return. What kind of terms? Complete reversal of the Council's decision. Full human autonomy, veto power over future Council votes. Carter considered this, and if we refuse, then they're prepared to formally withdraw from the Council themselves. They'd rather deal with us directly than watch their civilization collapse. The gravity of the situation was becoming clear. The galaxy wasn't just experiencing technical difficulties. It was facing the complete breakdown of the technological civilization that had developed over 2 centuries of human participation. The Quiet Revolution had become a complete collapse, and the aliens were finally beginning to understand the true cost of their decision. 3 months had passed since humanity's withdrawal from the Galactic Council. The galaxy was dying slowly but surely. Entire star systems had gone dark as their energy grids failed. Billions of beings faced starvation as food production systems broke down. Medical facilities were closing daily as equipment failed beyond repair. Council Prime Vexter stood alone in his private chamber, staring out at the dying city below. His homeworld's capital had lost power twice this week. The transportation systems were failing. Even the air recycling units in government buildings were starting to malfunction. Old because human engineers were no longer available to maintain the complex systems that kept modern civilization running. His aide entered quietly. Prime Minister, the emergency council session is ready to begin. Vexter nodded wearily. These emergency sessions had become a daily occurrence as the crisis deepened. Each day brought new reports of systems failing, colonies being abandoned, and governments collapsing. The mighty Galactic Council was falling apart piece by piece. The council chamber was only half full when Vexter arrived. Many delegates had been recalled to their homeworlds to deal with local emergencies. Those who remained looked desperate and exhausted. The proud alien leaders who had voted to restrict humanity now appeared broken and defeated. The Altarian delegate, who had lost 7 family members to treatable diseases in the past month, spoke first. We cannot continue like this. My people are dying from illnesses that human doctors could cure easily. The situation is the same everywhere, agreed the Centauri representative. Our industrial capacity has dropped by 80%. We're facing economic collapse. The Drachneri war chief Grolthak looked especially defeated. His once mighty military was now largely grounded due to equipment failures. We've tried everything. Our best engineers have worked around the clock, but they cannot replicate human technology. Perhaps we need to accept reality, suggested Counselor Thises quietly. We made a terrible mistake. We need the humans back. But they've ignored every communication attempt, protested the Naylor delegate. They won't even respond to our emergency broadcasts. Vexter looked around the chamber at the faces of broken leaders. These beings had once ruled star systems and commanded fleets. Now they were begging for help from the species they had tried to cage. We have one option left, he announced. We must offer them everything they want. And if they refuse? Asked the hegemony representative. Then our civilization ends. Vexter replied simply. The chamber's main communication screen suddenly activated without warning. The calm face of Admiral Lisa Carter appeared, looking directly at the assembled delegates. Her expression was serious, but not hostile. We've been monitoring your discussions, she said without preamble. We know about the crisis you're facing. Hope flickered in alien eyes across the chamber. Vexter leaned forward eagerly. Admiral Carter, thank you for responding. We desperately need to negotiate. What are you prepared to offer? Carter asked directly. The delegates looked at each other nervously. They had spent weeks discussing what they might be willing to give up, but actually saying it out loud was difficult. Complete autonomy for human space, Vexter began carefully. No restrictions on your expansion or military development. That's a start, Carter replied. What else? Full voting rights in the council, continued the Altarian delegate. Equal representation for humanity. Not enough, Carter said firmly. You outnumber us 400 to 1? Equal representation means nothing when you can always outvote us. Counselor Thises spoke up. What do you want? Veto power, Carter replied without hesitation. Any council decision that affects human interests must have our approval. The chamber fell silent. What she was asking for was unprecedented. No single species had ever held veto power over council decisions, the Draknari war chief growled softly. You're asking us to give you control over the entire council. We're asking you to treat us as equals, Carter corrected. Something you should have done from the beginning. And if we refuse? Vexter asked, though he already knew the answer. Carter's expression didn't change. Then you continue solving your problems without us, your choice. The delegates looked at each other desperately. They all knew what refusal meant. Their civilizations would continue to collapse. Billions would die. Entire species might face extinction as their technological infrastructure failed completely. We need time to discuss this, Vexter said weakly. You have 10 minutes, Carter replied. This offer won't remain open indefinitely. The screen went dark, leaving the delegates to face their impossible decision. They could accept humanity's terms and essentially hand over control of the galaxy to a species they had tried to subjugate. Or they could refuse and watch their civilizations die. The vote was unanimous. Every delegate chose survival over pride. When the screen reactivated, Vexter spoke for all of them. We accept your terms, all of them. When can your people return? Human. Ships are already en route to their former positions, Carter replied. Our engineers will restart the critical systems first. Medical teams will follow within hours. Full restoration of services should be complete within 1 week. The relief in the chamber was overwhelming. Several delegates were crying openly. Others were frantically contacting their homeworlds with the news that help was coming. There is one more thing, Carter continued. Jake Morrison will serve as humanity's permanent council representative. He will have full authority to speak for our species. Jake appeared on the screen beside the Admiral. He looked older than he had 3 months ago, but his voice was steady and confident. We didn't want to leave, he said quietly, addressing the assembled delegates. We wanted to stay and continue building a better galaxy together. But you forced us to show you what that galaxy looks like without us. He paused, looking directly at each delegate through the screen. We hope you never forget that lesson. We won't, Vexter promised solemnly. Never again. Within days, human ships began returning to their former positions. Engineers restarted the dead factories. Doctors returned to their patients. Scientists resumed their research. The galaxy slowly began to heal from the self-inflicted wound, but everything had changed permanently. The balance of power had shifted in a way that could never be reversed. Humanity was no longer just another species in the Council. They were the indispensable species, the ones who made galactic civilization possible. The other species had learned a harsh but necessary lesson. They had discovered that their advanced civilization was built on human expertise, human innovation, and human cooperation. Without humanity's willing participation, they were nothing more than primitives playing with technology they couldn't understand. Jake Morrison took his seat in the council chamber for the first time since the crisis began. The same aliens who had once demanded his species' surrender now looked at him with respect and more than a little fear. "The first item on our agenda," he announced calmly, "is a proposal to establish permanent funding for cross-species education programs. It seems some of you need to learn how your own technology works." The delegates nodded eagerly. They would agree to anything humanity proposed now. They had seen what happened when humans walked away quietly, and they never wanted to experience it again. The quiet revolution was over. Humanity had won without firing a single shot, simply by showing the galaxy how much they were truly worth. And the Council would never forget that humans were not just participants in galactic civilization. They were its foundation.